Great, thank you. And again, welcome everyone. Today we're going to have a wonderful conversation about alcohol, stress, and the workplace. My name is Karen Morton Clark, and I am one of several advisors for the Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative. And in partnership with Granite United Way, we are pleased to host this conversation today about alcohol, stress, and the workplace. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We would like to make sure that you stay muted throughout the entire presentation. That just really helps in terms of whoever is speaking not to have background noise and allows for a good flow of conversation. We do ask that if you do have any questions that you put them in chat. However, we won't be likely responding to any of those questions until the conclusion of the conversation. I know quite a few of you did submit advanced questions, which we did review. And for the most part, those have been incorporated into the conversation today by Cora. If there are any questions directly for me as we go along, you can certainly put those in the chat directly to me as well as to everyone if you like. But we would like to have you limit any verbal interruptions and anything beyond questions out of the chat. And again, we will address those at the end of the presentation. Cora has also agreed to chat with us a little bit longer once we've concluded the official part of the conversation. She will stay a few minutes longer to answer any additional questions you may have. And we will also share our contact information so that you can reach out to any one of us following the presentation for any one-on-one conversations that you may wish to have. So with that, I would like to give a more full introduction to our presenter today, Cora Long. Cora is a person in recovery from alcohol use disorder and serious mental illness. She has been the Substance Misuse Prevention Coordinator for Stratford County Public Health Network for over 5 years and has been on the steering committee for the Dover Mental Health Alliance since its inception in 2019. In her role, Cora works to prevent or reduce the progression of substance use disorder and reduce negative consequences for individuals, families, and communities. Much of her work is done through advocacy, strategic planning, creating and sharing resources, community education, and capacity building across sectors to address both mental health challenges and substance use disorder. We are certainly so pleased to have her with us today. And to begin the conversation, we thought it would be a good idea to talk about what is alcohol use disorder anyway, and maybe share a few statistics that will help to frame our conversation. So Cora, I'm going to turn it right over to you now.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here with us today for this important conversation. So to start, alcohol use disorder is a medical condition and is characterized by the impaired ability to stop or control alcohol use despite adverse consequences on your social, occupational, and your overall well-being and health. I'm sure many of you are aware that excessive alcohol consumption can have a serious effect on functions within your body, which could include your liver. It could damage your liver. It can even cause certain types of cancer. Excessive alcohol use can also impact the cortisol levels that you have in your system, which heightens the likelihood of experiencing health problems that are related to stress, like anxiety, depression, sleep disorders, things of that nature. Alcohol use globally contributes to 5% of the disease burden. So that means across the world. And it's also associated with enormous economic costs. Numerous workplace studies show that the economic costs can range anywhere between 33 billion to 68 billion per year in the workplace, and it can manifest in a few different ways. Some of those ways are accidents and on-the-job injuries. They're more prevalent among people that have alcohol use disorder. absenteeism as well. People with alcohol use disorder are estimated to have 4 to 8 times greater absenteeism than other employees. And also family members of people who have alcohol use disorder have higher rates of absenteeism as well. According to the 2021 National Survey of Drug Use and Health, 28.6 adults in the US over the age of 18 had experienced alcohol use disorder, and 894,000 adolescents, and adolescents are aged 12 to 17, also experienced alcohol use disorder in 2021.
Thanks, Cora. And I think these statistics are really worth noting on alcohol because alcohol is also a drug and it can even be perhaps more problematic than other drugs. And that might go unnoticed because it is socially acceptable. So just a couple of other stats that I know that we use as we give our trainings with Recovery Friendly Workplace. In New Hampshire, the per capita consumption is more than double what is called the healthy people target, and also more than double the US total. And this is according to the National Institute on Alcohol Abuse and Alcoholism as of 2019. And also there were researchers from Mass General that stated that during the COVID-19 pandemic nationally, there was a 21% increase in excessive and binge drinking. So with that in mind, Cora, can you talk a little bit more about some of the risk factors for alcohol use disorder and some of the reasons why people drink?
Yeah, so just to describe what a risk factor is, it's a characteristic that precedes and is associated with a higher likelihood of like a negative outcome. So in this case, when we're talking about risk factors, we're talking about things that precede and are associated with alcohol use disorder. Some of the most common risk factors for alcohol use disorder are genetics, drinking from an early age, family history of alcohol problems, mental health conditions, and a history of trauma. As far as why people drink, I mean, they do it for an array of reasons. Some people drink to celebrate, socialize, have a sense of belonging, and others might do it to calm their nerves or relax their inhibitions. Liquid courage is what they like to call it, after all. And some even do it to be even rebellious. People also tend to drink through tough transitions to deal with emotions and any challenges they might be having.
Boy, drinking to deal with emotions and challenges is such a great segue into the fact that research shows a correlation between stress and alcohol use disorders. I wonder if you can expand on that aspect a little bit, Cora.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're right. Research does show that there's a correlation between stress and alcohol use disorder. But that doesn't mean that just because somebody is stressed that they will drink, and that if they do drink, that they will develop an alcohol use disorder. Again, that has much to do with risk factors. But like I mentioned earlier, certain individuals find that alcohol helps them relax and feel good when drinking in moderation. It can temporarily ease anxiety and stress, which is why a lot of people turn to alcohol to cope with any challenges they might be having. Now I'm going to talk about chronic stress because this is where it gets a bit tricky. Chronic stress persists over a long period of time, and it's typically the result of ongoing troubles like financial troubles, work-related pressures, relationship issues, and if left unaddressed, it has similar effects as alcohol. Chronic stress can have adverse impacts on both of your physical and mental well-being. Chronic stress can lead to changes in the brain that make it difficult to control use of substances like alcohol. It can also trigger elevated cortisol levels, which will disrupt the brain's reward system and make alcohol use more gratifying. This can also create this pattern of dependence for people to use alcohol to relieve stress. So if you think about that for a moment, in today's socioeconomic and political climate, seemingly everyone is stressed. Everywhere I look, somebody is stressed, and they seem to always be stressed. And what do people do when they are stressed? Well, some people anyway, not everybody. People drink. So when you put that in a setting where people are chronically stressed, they might also chronically drink. Knowing the harmful side effects of excessive drinking alcohol, especially when used as a coping mechanism, can create this harmful cycle where alcohol use is actually amplifying somebody's stress and anxiety. And then their amplified stress and anxiety is causing them to drink more.
Wow. In addition to stress and anxiety contributing to alcohol use, those are such good points, Cora. Using alcohol as a coping mechanism, I think sometimes can be exacerbated by mainstream media. So that even adds more to the mix by kind of reinforcing the idea that alcohol is synonymous with a good time. So as we approach the holidays, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have this conversation prior to the holidays, I think this can be really true. Do you think that drinking to cope has become an accepted social norm due to the influence of the media? And maybe could you give some examples of how the media amplifies alcohol misuse, resulting in yet more stress, Cora?
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually gonna share my screen really quick here. So I've got some imagery to go along with this conversation. Can everyone see my screen? Thumbs up. Awesome. Um, yeah, like Karen said, mainstream media reinforces this idea that alcohol means you're having a good time. And it also perpetuates this idea that alcohol can also be this cure for the tough times. Drinking to cope has become an accepted social norm and something that we see regularly in our TV shows and movies and even some of our favorite songs. There's also social encouragement to make high risk drinking choices, and it's pretty common. We've got things like 2-for-1 drinks. We got happy hour, we got bar crawls, drinking games, holiday and work parties, football games, premarital parties, social media and advertising, and they all have an influence on the choices that we make as far as drinking goes. So you can see in some of this imagery, we've got Halloween bar crawl, we've got Thanksgiving, happy Drinksgiving, we've got Christmas. You know, you can see kind of how this is portrayed to us, you know, in imagery. Drinking is very much a part of Western culture. It's everywhere. It's on our screens, it's on signs in our stores, it's in our restaurants, our workplaces, our homes, and even our social circles. It quite literally is in our face every day if you think about it. So, with the holidays coming up, it can be hard to find anything that doesn't revolve around alcohol in some way. The holidays themselves, while often being traditionally celebratory, can also carry a lot of stress with them and pressure, whether that be financial pressures and stress or familial pressures and stress. Depending on the individual, it can be a source of sadness and isolation as well, which can make it a very difficult and even dangerous time for people that are in recovery, whether it be early recovery or long-term recovery. It can be a difficult time for people that currently have alcohol use disorder. And it can be a challenging time for people that are just social drinkers, because that transition from being a social drinker to an excessive drinker can sometimes go unnoticed, often by ourselves and by other people. And if you look at the slide, you can see, bam, we got Halloween, bam, we got Thanksgiving, bam, we got Christmas, then we got New Year's, football season. It's just an never-ending onslaught of things that really kind of revolve around drinking.
I think it's really good to remain mindful of all of these examples because they're so much a part of our visual culture that we sometimes just view them as normal and we're not really thinking about them. But I think it's really good to bring them to the forefront today. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about stigma as it relates to alcohol use disorder. What kinds of perceptions do some people worry about related to their alcohol misuse, Cora?
Yeah, just so to give kind of a really quick overview of what stigma even is, it's this negative attitude or belief towards a person or a thing, and it's based on a characteristic. It's often based on assumptions and generalizations rather than facts, and often involves derogatory language or negative stereotypes. So yes, there is a stigma with alcohol use disorder, and it leads people to worry about things like um, it harming their reputation or their career or even their family dynamic. Um, and they worry that it might be viewed as some kind of moral failing, an overindulgence, lack of willpower. The word alcoholic itself is often associated with so many different negative characteristics. Like, for instance, male culture often promotes this idea that manliness involves being able to handle your drink, meaning, alternatively, that if you can't handle your drink, you're not man enough. Another common stereotype is, if you think of the way an alcoholic is even depicted in media, they're, oftentimes represented as maybe houseless, disheveled, drunk all day, unemployed, visibly facing hardship, holes in their clothes. You know, you think of this giant mess, given how it's always been depicted in movies and stuff. But the reality is that there's a small portion of people that maybe match that description. A majority of people that are dealing with alcohol related challenges look just like you, me, and the next person in the room. Um, they could look successful, normal. I don't even know what normal is these days, but you know what I get. You get what I mean. And you wouldn't be able to really tell if they are actually an alcoholic. You have to really look in and see kind of what's going on to be able to really notice if somebody is experiencing an alcohol use disorder. And it's oftentimes these high functioning folks that are most concerned about the stigma that's associated with alcoholism.
Those are such great points, Cora. And I'm wondering if you can just describe how stigma impacted you personally in your recovery journey.
Yeah. So, um, Karen mentioned this, but I personally have a long history with trauma, serious mental illness, and substance use, which started early in my adolescence. I was always bouncing in this place between chronic stress, poor mental health, addiction, and suicidality. But everything really started to come apart in my adult life. And when my alcohol use disorder peaked, all of those social norms and the stigma involved really began to take a toll on me. It made me feel like I needed to be able to drink, to enjoy social settings, or to even be enjoyed by my friends. I felt like I needed and like I deserved to drink when I was having a hard time. But the problem was I was having a hard time all the time. So I was deserving to drink all the time in my mind. When the drinking got out of control, I hid it from my family, my friends, my colleagues, because I felt like this giant hypocrite and like I had morally and ethically failed because it really kind of went against everything that I cared about and what I was trying to do. Um, I also worried that other people would look at me like I was unstable or irresponsible. And I also worried that I get treated poorly. And above all, I was worried that I would lose my job, then my livelihood, and my daughter.
It sounds like all of these things were so challenging for you, Cora, and I so appreciate you starting to share your lived experience. It's so helpful for other people. I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable going into anything else that might have happened that impacted you more traumatically or changed your life significantly.
Yeah, so first I just kind of want to preface this with I'm gonna share something and it might be uncomfortable for some folks to hear. So if you are in a place where you're not ready to hear of somebody's traumatic experience or talk about suicide, then maybe plug your ears or mute me. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna dive into that a little bit right here. So like I said, I was experiencing chronic stress, and I was drinking very heavily to cope with it. I had very bad, poor mental health, um, and that was my coping mechanism. Um, I had recently been a victim of domestic violence, and for my safety, I was forced to move into an apartment that I couldn't afford. I was also trying to navigate the court system while dealing with trauma, and the loss of my relationship. I also wasn't eating or sleeping, and I was overworking myself. So I actually wound up losing 35 pounds in 4 months, and I was quite frail. At the time, I was also facing a layoff, and I had a extremely rough professional transition as a result of that. Um, I felt so isolated through that whole situation because my mom lives out in New York, and I had recently lost my long-term relationship and all the other relationships that came with that. And I also had lost my work family. So I lost my whole entire support system in one foul swoop. Um, so as you can imagine, it was a really hard time for me, and the alcohol wasn't helping. I was depressed, and I started regularly thinking about suicide, so much that it became pretty intrusive. And, sometimes alcohol would kind of drown those thoughts away, but other times it would really amplify them for me. It would remove my inhibitions, and, it'd be that liquid courage where I was like, I'm finally going to do it today. So it actually wound up getting really bad one night, and I drove myself into a very rural area down a dirt road, drank really heavily from inside of my car, and I crashed it into a tree. The aftermath of that was pretty severe, as you might imagine. I survived, but I had very serious injuries. I had broken my neck. I had a spinal cord injury. I had a brain injury. I had messed up my face pretty bad. I also totaled my brand new car. I got myself arrested, my license removed. And when you're dealing with serious injuries, and serious mental health challenges, and you're trying to get to all these different specialty care providers for all your injuries, it's really hard to do when you don't have any transportation, a brain injury, no support system. Um, so I was pretty screwed in that sense. I was out of work for an extended period of time. I also had no way of paying any of my credit card bills, any of my, car payment that I still had. Um, I couldn't afford to feed myself, pay my rent. I was thousands of dollars in medical debt at that point, which ultimately destroyed my credit. Um, I wound up losing the court case I had against my partner for the domestic violence situation. Uh, and I couldn't see my daughter. I couldn't see anyone. I was completely isolated in that through that whole situation. I spent a lot of time alone. And worse, I felt like a criminal that didn't deserve any kind of compassion. So reaching out was very hard for me. So, in that recovery period after my accident, I spent a lot of time grieving, but I also spent a lot of time self-reflecting.
Cora, I love that you shared that, and I just so appreciate your courage in sharing this piece of your story, as I'm sure everyone here does. But I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about how you reflected and how that helped, maybe being a little more specific about what your self-reflection was like.
Yeah. So, like I said, I grieved quite a bit. I reflected on mistakes and, the hardship. I also felt really stuck and like I had no way of getting myself out of the hole I was in. Um, and it really kind of led me to start thinking about, well, what can I do to fix this? And to start, I actually wound up learning quite a bit about alcohol itself from the Prime for Life curriculum, which actually really helped me through that reflection process. So I'll just kind of lead with some of the things that I learned from that. First, I learned that a standard drink is 12 ounces of beer, 5 ounces of wine, and 1.5 ounces of 80 proof liquor. And that if you're consuming a mixed drink or a full glass of wine, you're more than likely drinking more than one drink. Um, and I had, at that point, never really thought of it that way before. I always just kind of looked at it as one glass means one drink. And it didn't matter what the ABV was or what it was specifically that you were drinking. If anybody asked me how much I had to drink, if it was one cup, it was one one glass. Um, I also learned that drinking in moderation meant that men shouldn't have more than 2 drinks a day and no more than 14 drinks per week, and that women shouldn't have more than one drink a day and more than 7 drinks per week. That also kind of blew me away because at the time, I don't know if I had ever witnessed anyone drinking in moderation, not myself, not any of my friends. And in fact, most people that I knew binge drank, which made me think that was a normal and regular thing to do. Binge drinking is actually the most common form of excessive drinking, and it's defined by consuming 4 or more drinks in one sitting for women and 5 or more drinks in one sitting for men. So, I mean, if you go to any bar, you'll see binge drinking happening. Hell, it's even being advertised with the 2 for 1, happy hour. I mean, it kind of really makes you think about those social norms that I had described earlier. And finally, I learned that I was a heavy drinker. In fact, I was much, much worse than a heavy drinker. Heavy drinking is defined as consuming 8 or more drinks per week for women and 15 or more drinks per week for men. And I mean, I had been doing probably around 30 at least.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Cora. And I think a lot of people don't realize how powerful drinks can be. So I'm glad you pointed those things out. And I think drinks are often marketed in such a way that they can seem quite harmless, particularly for youth sometimes. But I feel good about the fact that there's more focus today on the many pathways to recovery from alcohol use disorder. And I'm wondering if you can share a bit more in detail about some of those different pathways.
Yeah. So depending on the nature and the progression of somebody's alcohol use disorder, some folks may need to start with a medical detox to make sure that they're transitioning into their recovery journey safely. Um, and beyond that, recovery options can include inpatient treatment, which is high intensity treatment, usually within specialty units or hospitals. That have medical clinics that offer both detox and rehabilitation services. There's also residential rehab, which is also this medium to high intensity treatment program. And it is, as it sounds, it's a residential setting where people receive treatment and support. And it can vary in duration, but it can also be up to a year. Moving from there, we've got partial hospitalization programs, which are also medium to high intensity treatment programs. Clients oftentimes attend up to 10 hours of treatment a day, 20 hours per week, and they continue to live at home or in a sober living environment while they do that. Then we have intensive outpatient programs, which are medium to high intensity as well. Those programs, patients also live from home or sober living environments, and they attend treatment for 3 hours a day, 5 days per week to start, and then they'll decrease over time. There's also outpatient treatment, which is low to medium intensity treatment. It can vary in intensity and duration, and it's dependent on what the patient's needs are and various other factors. It can it could be somebody that's attending treatment sessions several times a week, or maybe even just once a week. Again, really depends on what they're looking for and what they need. And then beyond that, there's also medication assisted treatment or recovery options. And this is medications that can help reduce urges or discourage alcohol use, or even make alcohol use unenjoyable for someone, or unpleasant in some ways. And some of those medications are naltrexone, acamprosate, and disulfiram.
So great you're sharing those options, Cora, because I know they might be new to some people. But in addition to those medical options, can you also talk about some of the behavioral therapies for alcoholism?
Yeah, so throughout those previous treatment programs that I mentioned, like inpatient, outpatient, they also provide some behavioral therapies that are currently used or commonly used to treat alcohol use disorders and, some other addictions. And these therapies can also be used sometimes in individual settings or group therapy sessions. So I'll just kind of go over some of the ones that I'll be discussing today. So first we have cognitive behavioral therapy, short form CBT. And it's a form of therapy that focuses on helping people identify and change thoughts and behaviors that led to or contributed to their addiction. It also focuses on helping people find healthy ways to cope with stress, and to help people develop skills that will help prevent, relapse in the future. Then we've got motivational enhancement therapy, which is more of a short form therapy, and it's designed to help motivate people to reduce or stop drinking and make some positive changes in their life. It can help them identify, the pros and cons of treatment. It helps people create this plan to create change within their lives, increase confidence, and develop skills for them to maintain their recovery-oriented goals. And then you've got kind of your like standard marital and family counseling, which is this form of talk therapy that will incorporate someone's loved ones into their therapy sessions if appropriate. As I'm sure many are aware, substance use disorders often directly or indirectly impact their relationships for loved ones around them. And this form of treatment can help repair or rebuild some of those damages that might have happened throughout their experience with addiction. Then you've got like brief alcohol interventions, which is where you meet with somebody that provides counseling services and sessions that provide more of a personalized feedback approach on someone's progression through recovery. But we've also got mutual support groups, and I love mutual support groups. I don't know if anybody's ever been to one, but if you're ever having a hard time, I recommend going to one. So I'm just going to talk about a few that I'm aware of. So we've got Alcoholics Anonymous, which is an abstinence-based mutual support group. It's 12 steps and 12 traditions. And then there's also kind of this offshoot of Alcoholics Anonymous, which is secular AA, which is very similar, except it kind of separates itself from the spiritual aspect of it. It's something that's available to people regardless of spiritual beliefs or lack thereof. Then we've got something called moderation management, which is a peer support community for anyone who wants to change their relationship with alcohol. It empowers people to accept personal responsibility for choosing and maintaining their own path to recovery, whether that be moderation or abstinence. Then another one we have is SMART Recovery, which stands for Self-Management and Recovery Training. It's a 4-point mutual support program utilizing self-empowerment and self-reliance approach. The 4 points are building and maintaining motivation, coping with urges, managing thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and living a balanced life to move away from addiction and find recovery.
So I'm wondering if you could just share where people can access these resources, whether it be in person or online. What would you consider some of the best sources to connect you to some of these resources, Cora? I'm thinking of 211 recovery community organizations. What would you say to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, like you said, the recovery community organizations, we have several scattered through New Hampshire. I know in my region, we've got SOS, Stratford County region for anyone in my region. But beyond that, I think 211 or the Doorway would be an excellent place to reach out to and let them know you're interested in exploring some of these mutual support options. And they can certainly point you in the correct direction, or you could reach out to your public health networks. Hi, me. And we have lots of resources that we'd be happy to share with folks.
Thanks for that, Cora. And by the way, we will have contact information at the end of this presentation for everyone. And we're also going to be talking a little bit more about how your colleagues came into play to support you, Cora. But before we get to that, you had mentioned abstinence. And I think a lot of people do feel that abstinence is the best option for sustained recovery. And certainly it works well for a lot of people, even despite evidence-based research. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on maybe what other things you'd like to add for those who may feel abstinence is still the preferred pathway to recovery, and just kind of more what your thoughts and experience were.
Yeah, so I'll lead my response with this. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's working definition of recovery describes it as a process of change through which individuals improve their health and wellness, live a self-directed life, and strive to reach their full potential. Now, you'll notice in that description that nowhere does it say that abstinence is the correct path or moderation is the correct path. It entirely focuses on how the person themselves, are carrying on with their life and whether or not they're reaching their full potential and living this self-directed life. And there's a reason for that. I don't think that we can say one method works better than the other because it depends entirely on the person. For instance, if somebody's attempting moderation management and they're not meeting the definition of recovery that I just described, then perhaps they might want to reassess themselves and explore a different pathway that works for them. And the same could be said about abstinence-based recovery as well. There are several studies that have demonstrated that controlled drinking is possible, and that moderation-based treatments are preferred over abstinence-only approaches, or might be preferred. But there's still this public perception and institutional view that alcohol treatments oftentimes still support zero tolerance. But evidence-based research shows that having multiple pathways available will lead to a more successful recovery. So ultimately, what I have to say to that is it really depends on what your needs are as an individual. So I actually came to my recovery on my own, and honestly, I just did what felt right for me. And back then, when I found my recovery, I didn't even actually identify it as recovery, because I too kind of held that institutionalized view that recovery meant abstinence. So, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit more, but all I knew is that I needed to do something to get myself better. And I personally didn't believe that abstinence was a right pathway for me because historically, like I said, I've struggled with substance use disorder since adolescence. And historically for me, abstinence applied this pressure on me in a lot of different negative ways. And I always seemed to crash and burn like full throttle into the ground when I would try abstinence. So everybody has a different path towards their own recovery. And on my path, I really focused on my personal drinking habits. I focused on harm reduction because harm reduction was really kind of what led me into getting into this profession. I really loved harm reduction, and I really explored my relationship with alcohol. So some things that I noticed in this reflection process of my relationship with alcohol, I noted that I had been drinking to cope with stress and depression. I acknowledged that. I also acknowledged that I was doing it a lot out of boredom and loneliness. Like I didn't have anything else better to do. Alcohol was easy to get. So I just sat there and drank, watched TV, and I'd sit there and just drink and drink and drink. I noted I did it excessively. Like I said, I would just drink and drink and drink. I had nothing else going on. I would also seek out higher alcohol content beverages. So if I were in a store and I was looking at the selection in front of me, I'd be like, which one packs the biggest punch? I'm going with that one. I always made sure that alcohol was accessible to me. And if it wasn't accessible to me, I would remove myself from wherever I was and get to a place where it was going to be accessible. So, for instance, if I was at a friend's house and there wasn't any alcohol there, or maybe there was only two drinks there for me, I'd have those two drinks and be like, oh, I gotta go. My dog's waiting at home, you know, and I'd leave so I could pick up some alcohol and go home and drink more in the privacy of my home, and people wouldn't question me as to why I was drinking so much or why. And I also noted in my relationship with alcohol that I often wasn't taking care of myself during my heavy drinking episodes. I was not sleeping. I was not eating. And if I was eating, I was just going to the fridge and cramming whatever I could into my mouth as quickly as possible because I realized I hadn't eaten all day. And oftentimes we're doing something like that. It's a very little nutritional value, like a Pop-Tart or something. So I also, realized that my stress was just this monster in my life, and it was leading to this poor mental health, and my poor mental health was leading to drinking, this vicious cycle that I told you about earlier when I was talking about chronic stress. So I tried to work on things that would change kind of what I could about my chronic stress, but also my mental health. And while I worked on those things, like reducing stress and improving my mental health, I also challenged myself just to not drink as much as possible. I didn't say don't drink at all. I just said don't drink as much as possible. And some of the different things that I did to kind of figure out how to learn to cope with, that chronic stress and that poor mental health was I am somebody that if I don't have any kind of structure, I fall apart. So the first thing I did was, well, I need to establish a routine here. And it was very simple, kind of how I did that. In that recovery period, I was alone for a very long time with no money, nowhere to go, nothing to do. So I kind of made up, a routine that I could do at home, which was get up, make my bed, brush my teeth, wash my face, take a shower, make my coffee. If I was feeling mobile that day, because again, I had a spinal cord injury and I was on a third floor apartment, I would try to figure out a way that I could get down the stairs and maybe for a walk to try to cope with some of that pain I was dealing with. So yeah, I also started figuring out, I historically, when I was depressed, I would constantly kind of lean into this negative space where I was watching sad movies and sad shows and listening to sad music and kind of shrouding myself in misery. So I started being like, well, what if I did the opposite of that? What if when I'm feeling really crappy, I start seeking out good, feel good content? So what I started trying to do was when I would feel really bad or crappy, I would throw on a comedy. I would listen to stand up. I would call a good friend and I would talk to them or to FaceTime them. And I noticed that it was kind of this placebo effect, really, because I was watching these kind of topical, happy things. And even if I was completely miserable, they would still make me laugh. And that felt good. And oftentimes it would kind of change my mood gradually to the point of where it wasn't unbearable. And that was a step in the right direction for me. I also kind of adopted this um, getting out and doing things thing when I was able to. Again, I was very injured. So, for me, that meant like going for walks or, you know, um, stepping out onto the front porch and getting some fresh air. That's obviously changed by now because I am a fully functional human being. So I go for walks, I go to concerts, I go hike trails, I go kayaking, all that stuff now, but back then it was a little bit different. But that is something that I also incorporated into these coping skills that I was building up. I also started painting, and that's really where I leaned in my recovery. That was something that I was able to do when I was incredibly injured. So I leaned into painting. I painted so many paintings when I was in my recovery journey, and it was very cathartic to me. And I never really realized how cathartic it was for me until I started getting better as I continued doing it. Um, and most importantly, I am somebody that gets very overwhelmed when I have even one thing piled on top of me, let alone 15 million trillion things that are enormous and impossible to get out of being piled up on top of me. And I had that at the time. I had no idea what to do or where to turn. And I remember calling my mom many, many times throughout my life and just being very chronically stressed and overwhelmed by everything and not knowing what to do. And she would always say, one day at a time, take it one day at a time. And I would always brush it off and be like, that's stupid advice, mom. Thanks for nothing. But it's true. And I really started to try to adopt that into my life. I really reflected on it because in that recovery process, I was calling my mom all the time. And what was she saying? Take it day by day, one day at a time. And that's when I was like, you know what, maybe I'll just try that. And it helped work. I really started focusing on the day in front of me and then realizing that the next day was a new day and a new opportunity. And even if today wasn't great, I still had tomorrow. And I started to really focus on solving just one problem at a time.
That's excellent, Cora. And I'm wondering if you could just briefly touch on some of the personal boundaries that you set that really helped in your journey of recovery.
Yeah. So my recovery path was not absence based, like I said. It was really kind of more like a moderation management, harm reduction approach. And so as I began working on these coping skills, and really trying to tackle those mental health problems, I actually found myself less reliant on alcohol to help me through those hard times. Like I said, absence was never my goal, but I did want to recover. So I decided to set personal boundaries with alcohol and with myself. And I managed to still uphold those boundaries even today. So I'll share some of them just as an example for anyone else that is interested in understanding how I functioned. Um, so for me, I don't drink when my mental health is poor or if I'm overly stressed. If I do drink, um, it's usually for special occasions or social set. Like if I hadn't seen a friend in a long time, they want to grab a beer. I allow myself that, but I nurse my drinks. I don't know if anybody knows what nursing your drinks means. It means you have a drink like this and you sip on it for a very long time and you take breaks as you're drinking it. So you're not pounding these drinks one after the other like I used to do. I don't keep alcohol in the house. I, if I ever have some kind of function at my house, like I have a pool now, sometimes I'll have pool parties. You know, I'll get just enough for that particular event to share with my friends and, myself. And if there's any leftover, I make them take it with them. So it's not sitting in my house with me. I always make sure I've recently eaten, that I've had stayed hydrated, and that I'm well slept if I'm going to drink alcohol. Um, and I mean, there's many other things that I boundaries that I set for myself, and those are just like a few examples of what I did to really ensure that I wasn't setting myself up to slip into this place where I was just going to continue drinking like I always was. Um, and so one last thing I wanted to note is that while moderation and overall harm reduction approach was helpful for me, it doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone. Recovery is not this one size fits all approach. Abstinence-based recovery is effective and might be a more suitable approach for somebody. But what I do want to say is that if you know somebody who might be in pre-contemplation for recovery, or somebody that even has alcohol use disorder, like full-blown alcohol use disorder, harm reduction is a great tool to use just to dip somebody's toes into kind of this world. It can always be used as like this first step in somebody's journey, because the point of harm reduction is just to keep somebody safe if they are doing something. And oftentimes, if you start incorporating some of these harm reduction practices or safe measures or boundaries, like I just mentioned, it can be the spark that really ignites somebody to want to recover.
Those are such great points, Cora. And I know a lot of people here today may be wondering how they can most effectively support a colleague who might be struggling with alcohol use disorder in the workplace. And you've shared quite a bit with me about how your colleagues really contributed to your overall recovery and helped build your confidence by the support that they gave. Can you share a bit more about that for everybody?
Yeah, so when I first returned to work after everything, after I'd healed, a lot of time had gone by. And when I got back, I felt like I was holding on to this dirty secret about myself that nobody could ever find out about. And I constantly worried that the wrong person would find out what had happened and immediately have me fired. I always felt like I was walking at glass, and that created additional grief and stress and isolation for me. So at the time, I had only confided in one colleague what had actually happened, and I believed that they were the only person that knew. But I found out several months after returning to work that my supervisor had known, and I had learned that by overhearing a conversation that she had unintentionally in front of me. Um, and that opened up this can of worms that allowed me to explain everything that had happened. It was a very emotional conversation that we had together that day. And after that happened, as scary as it was, and as much as I feared it, having it out there with her, with my supervisor, she knows, I know, it was like this giant weight had lifted off of me. And I started really moving forward in my role, knowing that I wasn't holding on to this secret alone. And over time, I became more comfortable sharing my journey with other people. So, some examples of what my colleagues and my supervisor did to support me are, and this is primarily my supervisor. She provided mentoring and guidance in my role. I was very unsure of myself when I had started in this job. And didn't really have anyone to turn to if I had questions or felt unsure about what I was doing. So she came and provided that huge missing piece for me. My supervisor also held me accountable. And what I say by that is she made sure I was setting goals and completing tasks on time. And we did weekly check-in meetings, see if I was having any challenges, and we would discuss them further and figure out ways that I could overcome those challenges independently or through offered help. Um, they also asked uncomfortable questions. And, I know that's something nobody ever wants to do because it's uncomfortable, but that means that if I was seeming off, maybe for an extended period of time, I was always, tired, I was, snappy or whatever, she would approach me about it. She would let me know, hey, I think something might be off here. Are you doing okay? Is there something I can do for you? And she was very genuine and compassionate and non-judgmental about that. They also supported me. And for me, that looked like they offered me rides, even after getting my license back and even, all that, I still wasn't medically cleared to drive. So offering me rides was a huge help to me in that beginning period. They started sharing helpful resources with me that would help me improve things that maybe I felt I wasn't very good at in my role. They helped me sort out work-related challenges. They took this, instead of a punitive approach, this strength-based approach where they celebrated my achievements and focused on my assets rather than, anything that might more or less be considered negative about me. There's nothing negative about me. I'm just kidding. But they also used open communication about challenges that we were having functioning as a team, which means like if we were in this like internal team setting, and I don't care what anybody says, we all have our own dynamic and sometimes we're all hard to get along with. But the way we approach that as a team is we address like, hey man, you interrupted me in this conversation and it kind of bugged me. Can we like talk about that and maybe do something different? That's just an example. And then beyond that, I was provided with additional supports like our EAP program. I was offered extra check-in meetings when I needed them. And I was also offered like this flexible kind of time off thing when there was flexibility to do so, where I didn't have to be like, oh, I need to get this request in 2 weeks ahead of time, where it was more flexible. Like if that day was free and they didn't need me, I could take it off if I needed it for like my mental health or whatnot.
Those are great examples. And this has been such a great conversation, Cora. Again, thank you so much. I'd like to conclude by having you bring up the resource slides that were prepared, because I think it's important to end with resources for those folks that might desire those. So if you could bring those up, there you go.
Yeah, so this slide has all the QR codes and some resources. So this slide really focuses on kind of those online resources that exist for people experiencing addiction or addiction in an alcohol setting. So Partnership to End Addiction is this online resource for parents and families, and it really focuses on prevention, early action, and treatment recovery. Then we got Partnership for Drug-Free New Hampshire, which also focuses on like an array of substances. It's not like particular to alcohol. The two really specific ones to alcohol is Binge Free 603, which is really kind of young adult based. But it also, the information within it could apply to older populations as well. There's lots of great information there, and it really talks about what binge drinking is and ways that you can kind of offset that or maybe change your behavior around it. I really like it because it does take kind of a harm reduction approach with some of the content on it. Then we got Rethinking Drinking, which is an excellent resource. And it includes resources like the ones I discussed today, like moderation management and smart recovery. Then we got Onward New Hampshire, which is a resource that has a bunch of training materials and information about identifying and addressing mental health crisis and serious mental illness. I'm cruising right through here because I know we're running late. Next slide, we've got 2-in-1, The Doorway, 988, Rapid Response, Strong as Granite. These are all things that we have available here in New Hampshire. So again, QR codes to the websites, links, descriptions of what they are, and their logos, of course. So happy to share these slides with everybody.
Yep.
And here's our contact information.
Yes, and thanks for that, Cora. And I will also be sending the slides to all the participants so they have all that great information and can access those QR codes. So with that, I would like to conclude the official portion of this presentation. And just on behalf of the Recovery Friendly Workplace in partnership with Granite United Way, Cora, I'd just like to thank you for sharing all your personal lived experience as well as all that information. We so appreciate you and are grateful for you, especially as we're heading into the holidays. I think this is great information that you covered. And also, if anyone does have any questions right now, Cora is happy to stay a few extra minutes to answer those. So you're welcome to either unmute or put them in chat as you wish. Otherwise, if you do have one-on-one questions that you'd like to talk with Cora or anyone from the Recovery Friendly Workplace about, that's why we're providing that contact information for you. And I can also put that in chat as well. So with that, I'll just, again, thank everyone for being with us today. Christy, you can go